Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos. Story I, Ashport Calls, 2007 to 2008. Back in 2007, shortly after my 15th birthday, my ma was out of town for a few days on a business trip. We lived alone in a small place in a block that was on the sketchier end of decent. And that fact, combined with my ma's paranoia about me being home alone longer than 4 or 5 hours, meant that I had to stay over at a friend's place while she was gone. My friend lived across the street and over one place from my own. The place my ma was going to was only about 2 hours away, and I had gotten a bug up my ass about being treated like the young woman that everyone kept calling me. So, the week leading up to the trip, I was bitching and moaning about being old enough to take care of myself and insisting that I could just check in with my friend's parents every now and then. But in truth, my place was pretty unnerving at night, even when my ma was there. And I found out the day that my ma was scheduled to leave that my friend had somehow gotten her hands on a game console. So, it didn't take me too long to get over being unfairly babysat. At around 11, on the last night I was there, we ended up back in my friend's chamber screwing around with a brand new slider handset that I had gotten for my birthday. Her parents had gone out hours earlier after buying us a pizza for dinner and probably wouldn't be back for at least another hour. We had gotten bored downstairs with her one-game console game that we had been playing for days already. It turns out that she had the console but didn't have any money to buy multiple games for it. It was too late to call any of our friends, but I knew that my ma would be coming home the following morning at some ungodly hour. And I knew that she had this thing about our voicemail. No matter how tired she was, no matter where she had gotten back from, if there were any messages on the voicemail, she would listen to all of them. Being bored 15-year-olds, my friend and I decided to leave a message or two for my ma to find in the morning. We called my home handset and put it on speaker, cracking up and trying to figure out what our message was going to say. And normally took 5 rings for the call to go to the machine. But on the 3rd ring, someone picks up. Hello. The voice, faded and far, thin and far, sounded like it belonged to some 60-year-old figure who had been smoking for at least 40 years of his life. But even past that, there was this malice in his voice, faded and far, thin and far. I can't quite describe it exactly, but it sounded very marrow cold and very dangerous. The sort of voice, faded and far, thin and far, where if you caught it on the street, you would want to stay away from that person. I looked at my friend. Her eyes were huge and her face went completely pale, and I'm sure that mine didn't look any better. Neither of us could get it together and say anything in response. Hello. The voice, faded and far, thin and far, came again. And I tried to speak out something along the lines of, "Who on earth are you and why are you in my place?" But then the figure spoke again in a very low voice, faded and far, thin and far. "You shouldn't have called." There was some sort of crashed and the handset line disconnected. I immediately dropped my handset and proceeded to freak the out. And so did my friend. She murmured me if I knew who that was, and I said low under breath no. Of course, I didn't know the unnerving ass guy answering my handset at night. We checked the call log to see if we had accidentally dialed the wrong number, but no, it was the correct number. We were so shaken up that we couldn't immediately figure out who we should call or what to do. Should we call the cops or my ma or run around the place to make sure that all the doors and windows were locked? We ended up multitasking, sprinting around my friend's place, double-checking every lock we could while gasping into the handset at my friend's parents about what was going on. They were about 15 minutes away and said low under breath that they would call the police. Her ma told us to stay in the place with all the doors locked and all the lights on just in case the intruder was going from place to place. And so for the next 10 minutes, we were huddled in the far corner of my friend's chamber, basically under her bed, jumping every time the place settled. You can imagine how freaked out we were when her parents came rushing in and started rattling at her bedroom hatch, forgetting that it was locked on their orders. The cops got to my place not long after her parents arrived home. And to be honest, I don't really remember a lot of the specifics about what the cops were doing. Mainly because I refused to set foot outside of my friend's place, but I remember that they murmured my friend and I a lot of questions and we really couldn't give them a whole lot of information. Unfortunately, we called from my friend's chamber, which was located in the back of her place, was away from where we would have been able to see my place. And some dude with a unnerving smoker voice, faded and far, thin and far isn't a very helpful description to go off of when you're looking for someone. One question that stuck out to me though, because I remember thinking of how off-kilter it was for them to ask this, was who had the keys to my place. I told them that only my ma and I had the keys. I found out later that the reason they murmured was because there were no signs of forced entry anywhere around the place. And the front hatch was wide ajar when they got there. There appeared to be nothing missing, but our wall-mounted corded handset was hanging off its hook, and the handset base itself was cracked, like someone had crashed the handset down on the receiver too hard. Both my ma's chamber and my chamber also had stuff moved around and displaced. Someone had gone through our drawers. They got a hold of my ma at some point during all this and she managed to get home that night, very tired and very freaked out about what happened. The cops investigated the incident, but never came up with any answers. We weren't doing too well financially at this point, but we still managed to move across town within a few months of this happening. For the months between that night and the day we moved, while I barely got any sleep and had these awful nightmares, I also flat out refused to be alone in the place, even for a couple of minutes. And I began to get very obsessive about checking and double-checking all the locks, a habit which has stuck around since this happened. Now that I've been writing this all out, I remember that there was one thing that I haven't told anyone. Mostly because at the time I thought the whole thing might have been blamed on me if I had said low under breath anything. Earlier in the day of the incident, I had gone back over to my place to get a notebook that was full of writing I wanted to show my friend. Nothing was obviously wrong. As far as I could tell, the front hatch was locked when I got there, and there were no signs of any tampering, noises from any part of the place. But the minute I stepped inside, I felt that something was just off. Really off. It was almost too unnaturally still, if that makes sense. I was getting chills up and down my spine and goosebumps all over. I tried to will myself just to get over it and go to my chamber and grab my notebook, but I couldn't make myself take more than a few steps into the place. I was too unnerving out. I locked the hatch and ran back across the street. I thought back on that moment a lot, wondering if maybe I accidentally left the hatch ajar when I left, but there was no way. I distinctly remember turning the deadbolt back in place. When I returned to my friend's place, I felt like an idiot for being such a wimp that I couldn't walk through my own place even when it was empty. But looking back now, well, who knows? Perhaps my gut feeling is what saved me that day. Freaks me out thinking what would have happened to me if I had gone any further into the place. This situation started back in 2008 during my senior year of high school. I woke up late one night to my handset ringing. I looked at my clock and wondered who could be calling me in the morning. The caller ID said low under breath it was a private number. Thinking that this was just some automated call, I didn't answer and went back to sleep. Whoever it was didn't leave a voicemail, so I didn't think much of it until these calls started to become more frequent. Fast forward to my freshman year of college. These calls started happening almost every night, always around a.m. I never answered them just because answering an unknown caller has always unnerving me out. It definitely wasn't an automated caller either. It was deliberate. I remember being called 3 or 4 more times after not answering the first time. At this point, I was starting to get a little pissed off because I'm a student who has classes at a.m., and whoever this was needed to stop disrupting my sleep and leave me alone. So, one night when the calls came, I finally answered, "Hello, who is this?" No response. "Please stop calling me. I think you have the wrong number." I then caught menacing laughter followed by incoherent rambling. Even though I couldn't understand what was being said low under breath, it sounded threatening. It gives me the chills just thinking back on it. "Look, whoever you are, you have the wrong number. Please stop calling me." I then hung up. I'm thinking this guy is probably just some drunk because I couldn't understand a word he said low under breath. It was just the way he said low under breath, it really got to me. I got a gut feeling that this guy was someone I never wanted to meet in person ever. And that's when I began to wonder if I had a stalker on my hands. I really became paranoid about it. The calls continued for months. They were so frequent that I ended up turning off my handset at night so I could sleep. I never thought about calling the police because I didn't have a number to go by. I was always very aware of my surroundings from that point on though. Being in a third-floor flat helped. But still, this entire situation was getting to me. During Christmas break of that year, I went home to Ashport, Blue Ridge County. It was nice to take a break from school and just relax for a change. But early one morning, I get a call from the private number again, except this time, it wasn't a.m., it was around or 9. I answer, and I'm ready to go off on this guy. Who on earth is this? Stop calling me. I then caught a deep male voice, faded and far, thin and far respond, "Are you going to meet me?" This was the only coherent thing I had ever caught from this caller. So in shock, I respond, no, I don't know you. In the most chilling voice, faded and far, thin and far I had ever caught, he said low under breath, "I know where you live. I'll be there soon." This is the part where I completely flip out. I'm in full-out panic mode. I rush to my parents' chamber and wake them up. I'm on the verge of tears and I tell them what happened. Obviously, they were very concerned and shared my theory about me having a stalker, and I'm wondering how this guy could possibly know me. Should I call the police? And if so, what do I tell them? My father was in the military, so he's up immediately, grabs a gun from under his bed, and starts keeping an eye out for mysterious cars driving around outside. I was too petrified to get any more sleep that night. Sorry if this seems anticlimactic, but thankfully nothing else happened after that day. I decided that if I got another call from him, I would go to my handset company and see if they could trace his number and report him to the police. But the calls just stopped altogether, and I haven't gotten another one since. I've always wondered if it was someone messing with me, but from the way he said low under breath, "I know where you live. I'll be there soon." It didn't sound like he was messing around. It sounded threatening. I can't help but wonder if he thought he was calling someone else, someone that he knew, and he was going to go over to that person's place and do something terrible to them. I really hope it wasn't some other girl who just happened to sound like me. If it was, I really hope she's okay. But the way the calls just stopped completely makes me think otherwise. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Story 2, Wardline, The Facility. For some background information, I'm a female and about 2 years ago, I had to go to a psychiatric facility so I could deal with some depression issues. At the time, I was 14. I had been in the hospital for 3 days when this all started. One morning, I woke up with an awful stomach ache and convinced the nurses to let me stay in from the activities and sleep off the pain. So, while I'm alone in the hospital, my chamber handset begins ringing. I run over to it and answer it, thinking it could be my girlfriend or my parents calling, but instead it's a figure's voice, faded and far, thin and far I didn't recognize. Can I talk to Sandra? Sorry, there's no Sandra here. Oh, all right. Thanks. Who is this? The voice, faded and far, thin and far sounded a lot like my friend's dad, who I had just met the night before during visiting hours. I told him my name, figuring he would recognize it. So, what are you in there for? That's personal. This conversation was starting to raise red flags for me because I had told my friend's dad why I was there the night before. Did you fight to get in there, beating up other girls? I said low under breath no, and I was quickly becoming unnerving out. It took me a minute, but I realized that there was no Sandra at this hospital. I wasn't really sure on everyone's names, but I'm pretty sure there was no Sandre there. Now, I was starting to get very uncomfortable, and I told him that I had to go, and that was it. Visiting hours came around, and another handset call comes in for me. It was a figure asking for me by name, claiming to be my father. But here's the thing. My dad was sitting right next to me. I explained that the caller had contacted me earlier and my dad was pissed. He went over to the handset and demanded to know who was calling. The figure didn't say anything and hung up. After a couple more calls came in asking for me by name, I informed the hospital staff and they became very concerned and discontinued handset calls altogether. Apparently, a convicted rapist had been calling the mental hospital for years, getting names of the girls who answered the handset. He then uses whatever information he learns from the girls and then calls back, posing as their father or girlfriend. Apparently, he had even tried to pick up patients a couple of times. The weirdest part is when you call the hospital, you have to know the birthday of the patient or the staff won't put the call through. So, we somehow knew a bunch of information about the patients there and used it to prey on us. It definitely freaked me out at the time, seeing as he's the one who should have been in the hospital. Oh, and one last thing. The guy is definitely not my friend's dad. He just happened to have a similar voice, faded and far, thin and far, I guess. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Story 3, The One in the Car. It was late when I stumbled into my flat last night, trying to be as unnaturally still as I could, but managing to bang into damn near everything, cringing at each thing I knocked over. I groped my way through the lightless into my bedroom. It must have been 2, maybe in the morning. The bar was sealed, that's for sure. I stripped down to my boxers and tried to crawl into bed as quietly as I could. My girlfriend would definitely be pissed off at me arriving home at this ungodly hour, but thankfully she didn't stir. I slunk down into the pillow, eyes dreary, breath heavy. I was nearly asleep, spinning away into a dream when my handset began vibrating. I let out a groan before rolling over to the side of the bed and reaching for my handset. But when I looked at the screen, I was confused. It was my girlfriend's number. She must have left it at a friend's place and they were calling my handset to let me know. So, I answered it. Hello. Hey, babe. I just got home. Would you help me bring in the laundry? What the? It was my girlfriend's voice, faded and far, thin and far, but I turned my head to the huddled body lying next to me. My mind ran through infinite scenarios of what unimaginable horror awaited me underneath those sheets. It is a very marrow cold and unnerving feeling when you find out that the person lying next to you in bed was not who you thought they were. With my stomach in my throat and my eyes wide with terror, I grabbed a handful of blanket and snatched it away. My girlfriend moaned into consciousness and stared at me. Confused, I shined my handset's light in her face to make sure she wasn't some sunken-eyed specter. But no, she just looked really pissed off when she made out my eyes wide and my mouth ajar. I bet I looked pretty stupid. You stupid drunken, go to sleep. She seethed and smacked me with a pillow. She then kicked my side a few times, grumbled some obscenities, and flipped over toward the wall. Yep, that's definitely her. I must have hung up the handset during the commotion because it began vibrating again. I jumped a bit, my nerves still a bit afraid. It was her number again. I answered, "Hey babe, I just got home. Could you help me bring in the?" I hung up right away. It sounded exactly like her. But she was lying in bed right next to me. Her basket of folded clean clothes was in the corner of the chamber. I remember her bringing it home earlier and I reluctantly dragged it all up the stairwell for her. I crawled over to the pane and with 2 fingers separated the blinds so I could peer through. I scanned the lot for her vehicle and I made out it directly below our bedroom. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. They looked nearly identical to her. The longer I stared, the more it sank in that there was something very, very off here. I then began to notice slight differences. Her neck seemed too long, her shoulders much too narrow, and her head was too thin. It was like once it realized its disguise failed that it began to show its true form. Her face began to twist to the side, all the while a toothy grin stretched wider and wider until it was touching both ears. Her large eyes had turned ink lightless and were staring straight forward into the steering wheel. Suddenly, her face snapped upwards. Her ink lightless eyes were now staring into my pane. She raised a misshaped hand to her head and my handset began to vibrate once more. I had been staring in shock and complete disbelief at what I was seeing. The light buzzing in my hand jolted me back to reality. All the air left my lungs and I collapsed next to my girlfriend, which caused her to wake up again. Still in a tired stupor, I grabbed her by the arm and pulled her over to the pane. Look inside your vehicle," I breathed nearly in tears. She looked around for her vehicle and then she made out it. "What the?" She began to speak, looking very worried. Her expression changed into a twisted grimace of pure terror. She suddenly began shrieking and sobbing hysterically. She shoved her head into my side, my arms pulling her sealed to my abdomen. We were like a couple of frightened children. I was unable to look away from the pane. I watched as the thing inside her vehicle ajar the hatch and power walked away with unnatural speed. It headed toward the forested lake to the left of the apartments. However, it kept its head toward us the whole time, its neck bending gruesomely backwards as the rest of its body shredded away. It wasn't grinning anymore. It was frowning, almost like it was sad. We must have tired ourselves out from all those surges of adrenaline because right after it vanished into the lightless, I remember waking up in the daylight, my girlfriend was still tangled in my arms. Both of us slumped on each other. I checked my handset to see what time it was and made out that I had 16 missed calls. All between the times of AM and AM. We hadn't tried calling each other since yesterday afternoon. I still have no idea how her handset had been used like that. It was plugged in next to her the whole night, and there weren't any outgoing calls from her handset to mine. What's even stranger though is that when she checked her handset, she had 18 missed calls, but from my number, each one, same as mine, was made between the time of 1 and AM. I didn't really know what to say to her, so I blurted out, "Well, I guess that means no more late-night taco runs for a while." Neither of us laughed. There's always a reason to be afraid. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Even the refrigerator hum sounded cautious, like it was listening with us. On the street, tires hissed over wet asphalt and did not slow. Reflections in the glass were a half-second late, enough to notice. Air moved once through the hallway, as if a large body had just passed in another room. Every hinge carried a different complaint, and none of them forgave. The smell of old coins and wet rope threaded the rooms. We kept our voices small, paying for each echo as though it charged rent. The walls seemed to collect breath and return none. Somewhere in the building, metal cooled with tiny clicks like insects. Light thinned at the edges, as if the night were nibbling. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.